It all began when I married Robert, a man I had fallen deeply in love with. He was older, kind, and had a history that I respected. He had 2 children from a previous marriage, Mark, his son, and Jessica, his daughter. Robert had always talked about his children with pride, though there was a certain distance between them. Mark, in particular, was a quiet young man in his early 20s who had recently moved back to town after finishing university. He didn't spend much time with his father, but I assumed it was just part of the natural distance between parents and adult children. The first few months of our marriage passed by smoothly. Robert and I were adjusting to our new life together, and I was learning how to blend into his family. Mark, though respectful, didn't visit much. When he did, he was polite but distant. I didn't mind. After all, he was an adult with his own life. But then, things began to shift. We had moved into a larger house to accommodate our growing family. And Mark, who had been living nearby in a small apartment, began visiting more frequently. Robert was thrilled. He wanted to reconnect with his son, and I was happy to welcome him into our home. At first, it was just the usual dinners and casual conversations. But before long, I started noticing a change in Mark's behavior. It was subtle at first. Mark would linger around when I was in the kitchen, offering to help when I didn't need it. Sometimes, after dinner, he'd stay behind to help clean up, which was unusual since he often left right after meals. It wasn't that I minded his company, but there was something about the way he looked at me that unsettled me. His gaze seemed to linger just a little too long, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking at me differently. One evening, after Robert had gone out of town for work, Mark came over to spend time with me. He said he needed help with a project and asked if I would mind working with him in the living room. He was going to show me something on his laptop, he explained. At first, it seemed innocent enough, but as we sat down together on the couch, I began to feel uncomfortable. Mark's body language had shifted. He was sitting closer to me than usual, his arm brushing against mine occasionally. I tried to ignore it, reminding myself that he was just being friendly. But then it happened. Mark leaned in, and before I could react, he kissed me. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was shocking, to say the least. I pulled away immediately, my mind racing. "What are you doing, Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me with wide eyes, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. "I'm so sorry," he stammered. "I don't know what came over me. I thought you'd feel the same." I didn't know how to respond. My mind was swirling with confusion, anger, and disbelief. How could this be happening? Mark, my husband's son, had just crossed a line that felt both personal and deeply hurtful. I wanted to yell at him, to demand answers, but all I could do was sit there, numb from the shock. "Please leave, Mark," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. "I need you to leave right now." He didn't argue. He stood up quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment and regret. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you," he repeated, his voice shaky as he walked out the door. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat there staring at the empty space where he had been, trying to process what had just happened. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen the signs? I had always thought of Mark as a son in some ways. Though not by blood, I never imagined he would betray me like this. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the events over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it all. How could someone I trusted, who I had tried to welcome into my life and my heart, do something so cruel? Was this my fault? Had I somehow led him on without meaning to? When Robert returned the next day, I knew I couldn't keep this from him. He had always been supportive, and I trusted him with my feelings. I told him everything that had happened, my voice breaking as I recounted the evening. He listened in stunned silence, his face pale as I finished. "I never thought this would happen," I said, fighting back tears. "I never thought Mark could do something like this." Robert's expression was a mixture of disbelief and hurt. He had always been close to his son, and hearing that Mark had crossed such a boundary was too much for him to process. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice quiet. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe it was just a mistake." But I could see the doubt in his eyes. Deep down, he knew that Mark had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The following days were tense. Mark tried to contact me, sending texts and calling. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. Robert confronted him, and Mark admitted to everything. He was apologetic, but his apology felt hollow, like he was sorry for getting caught more than anything else. He couldn't give us a clear explanation for his actions. He claimed it was a moment of weakness, that he had been confused about his feelings. But I couldn't trust his words. In the end, Robert and I agreed that it would be best for Mark to stay away for a while, giving us space to heal. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the trust that had been broken between us as a family. We needed time to figure out what this meant for our future, both individually and as a couple. Mark never returned to our home after that. Robert and I tried to rebuild our relationship, but the damage had been done. The trust we had worked so hard to build was shattered, and it felt like everything had changed. Robert still loved his son, but he couldn't ignore what Mark had done. And me? I was left questioning everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and family. I never imagined that someone who was once so close to me could betray me in such a way. It left me with scars that would take years to heal, if they ever would at all. And while I knew I had to move on, I would never forget the feeling of being betrayed by someone I had considered family.